Time to say a very, very good morning to Helen Dale. How are you, Helen?
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Very well indeed. Imagine my surprise to wake up to such a terrible scene as Ian Blackford blocking me. I don't even know why he's blocked me. I mean, I haven't said anything particularly to him.
Get Lewis to rip his voice off.
He does very well, I'm afraid. He does it.
Go on, do it.
He
It
does.
would be awesome. I will just sit around and listen and roll on the floor laughing.
Yes, no, Lewis is a man of many talents, and I'm looking forward to him doing George Galloway as well, because he's fantastic.
Oh gosh, yes, and get all the Scottish
No, he's
people
gonna do
and just
them all.
get Lewis to rip all their voices off and just have get one person to do all the voices. That's a real skill. It's like a ventriloquist. It's
Well, the thing
terrific.
that he's brilliant at is he can actually do it in one sentence. He can change from Joe Biden to
Yes,
George
I
Galloway
know. He
in
did
one
that
sentence.
with Trump and Biden once. I think it was
He
on
did.
your show. He
Yeah.
changed from Donald Trump to Joe Biden in the middle of a sentence.
Incredible.
It was amazing.
Incredibly talented man. If only those people from Extinction Rebellion had half of his talent, they might be able to again engage themselves in some sort of positive activity instead of breaking windows.
I must confess, when I first saw footage from that, there was various people had Reuters had some, the Met had some, and the Sun had various bits of footage. I was sitting there thinking, none of you lot have ever wielded a hammer in your life, have you? You are the most extraordinarily cack-handed hammer users. I mean, quite possibly as cack-handed as it's possible to get.
Yeah.
I mean, I realise women tend not to be as good at practical things as men are. That's a stereotype, it's true. But at least
Yeah, but being a woman, you're
when-
allowed to say that. You see, I can't say that, but you can.
Otherwise, you'll be cancelled.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, when I was a girl, I mean, it probably helps growing up on a farm, but when I was a girl, my father and my two older brothers taught me to do things like change batteries and change tires and wield a hammer and chisel in such a way that I didn't finish up with bits of glass or wood or whatever it was flying into my face. And I did have, because I've got quite a lot of tradesmen follow me on Twitter. I don't quite know why, but maybe for that piece I wrote on meritocracy for
Maybe they're just
Standpoint.
hoping you might ask them to do some paid work at some point.
There's always that too. But one of them just underneath my tweet saying that I'm going to be on the Independent Republic this morning, he said, and no safety glasses either. Just thought,
Well, I mean, I suppose there's one ray of light on the scene. Then, if they're not actually worrying too much about that, I mean, it would probably depress me beyond measure to see protesters wearing health and safety gear.
Well, they were wearing masks, although you could still identify them through the masks.
Right.
It was all very silly.
Right, but why? I mean, after all of this debating that we've been having about the kill the bill people and the fact that peaceful protest must be allowed and all of that, I mean, why are they suddenly rearing their heads again now? We haven't been around for a while. Extinction Rebellion.
Extinction Rebellion.
I mean, I'm tempted to say it's because it's the Easter holidays.
Yeah, it's quite possibly true, although a couple of them at least looked a bit older. I mean, one of my tutors at Oxford used to refer to undergraduates as pimples on the seat of learning.
Yes.
And I think it's fair to say, and that's why I'm very pleased you retweeted my tweet of Professor Steve Davies's article on environmentalism and the problem with the Extinction Rebellion. Because I think Extinction Rebellion really are pimples on the seat of conservation.
Yeah.
The advocacy that they engage in is just bonkers, even if you are pro-conservation, as I am, and as Professor Davies makes it clear in his article, he is also as well. I mean, because they're just advocating things that are impossible, that you cannot do at the same time. I mean, the big one that Professor Davies points out is it is not possible to keep the internet in its current form. They all think that, oh yes, we'll all be able to work from home and continue to have the internet in our renewables future. This is just a fantasy. The internet uses more power than the global airline industry. And this is the global airline industry before COVID, not now.
Right.
Okay, so this is just a fantasy.
In terms of actual energy used.
In terms of energy use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Professor Davies makes that point. There are other areas as well. If you're going to not use fossil fuels, like, for example, oil is a large part of fertilizers. Yeah, so I'll go back to the agricultural stuff because I know quite a lot about that. It is a large part of modern fertilizers. You have to turn agriculture, which is extensive at the moment, mostly, for the most part, it has to become intensive. It has to become effectively a form of horticulture,
Right.
which requires an enormous amount of hands-on labor. So you can do fairly good quality, efficient agriculture that is productive and produces a good quality product using labor intensive methods. You can do that. But it does mean that you are going to finish up with a situation that is very much like Europe before the First World War, where approximately 30% of the population outside of the UK, which of course was trading with the Commonwealth and being fed by Australia and Canada and New Zealand and South Africa. But you finish up with certainly in Europe and the United States, you would finish up with about 30% of the population needing to be farmers.
Yeah.
Now that means you have a new political group. You have peasant farmers. Now we talked before when I did my online review here, and also I wrote a piece, I think, at the Spectator or CapX about Vernon Bogdanor's latest book. One of the reasons why the distorting quality of the Common Agricultural Policy is so intense is precisely because it was designed for two countries, France and Germany, but to a degree others, but particularly France and Germany, that have a large population of peasant farmers. Now they finish up having their own political interests and their own political values that then feed into politics. One of the things they did before the Second World War, and this is one of the reasons why the Common Agricultural Policy was developed, was precisely because when they had bad years, they hated moneylenders, and many of the moneylenders in the time they couldn't repay their debts in the period before the Second World War were Jews, and so they responded to bad years and bad debts and not being able to pay their creditors off with anti-Semitism.
Yes.
De Gaulle knew
and
this.
I mean, they've always been quite a conservative group of people as well. But let me ask you this, Helen. Let's talk about your environmental sort of model, as it were, because if the Extinction Rebellion one isn't what you think is a worthwhile one, what is a worthwhile one? Because we saw only the other week Nigel Farage getting it in the neck for revealing himself to have always been a green advocate, which nobody was very sure about, I have to say, before now. But he is an example, I suppose, of what you might regard as the acceptable face of environmentalism.
One of the points that Professor Davies makes in his piece, which I encourage you to read, is that, I mean, and it's why I use the word conservation rather than environmentalism, is that conservatism and conservation used to have common roots. Conservation used to be a feature of the right of politics. It was not on the left, because the socialists and the Marxists are huge advocates of modifying the environment and making it the servant of man.
Yeah.
You know, in that sense, you see that Marxism very much does have Christian roots. It's very much the dominion over nature.
And it's quite agriculturally based as well, which is not particularly friendly to the environment.
But also it did involve socialism and socialists getting into extraordinary pseudoscience. And the most famous example of that pseudoscience was Lysenkoism, which of course is the inheritance of an argument that you can inherit acquired characteristics. The easiest way to describe this is, imagine, for example, that if you went around and snipped off cats' tails, okay? If Lysenkoism were true, those cats would have at least some kittens that had no tail because you'd snipped off the tail. So it's pseudoscience, okay? And this is what led to some of the really extraordinary and destructive environmental disasters in the former Soviet Union and in the People's Republic of China when Chairman Mao was the great helmsman, because this idea that you can dominate nature does go down a pseudoscientific path. And that's why environmentalism became associated, at least initially, with conservatism. But it was always an argument about living in harmony with nature. It was never an argument about trying to completely transform the economy in such a way to make it so that it would never grow again. So this non-growth economy.
Presumably it also didn't have an end game, which was the sort of thing that we now apparently chase, like a sort of a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, zero carbon. Because zero carbon is a concept only. For me, it's a political concept. It's not an achievable. It's like zero COVID. You know, you're not going to ever get there.
Yes, it's not achievable.
What's the point?
And the other problem with it, of course, is that, and as Professor Davies points out in his article, is it really is denial as a river in Egypt in this case. Yeah. Because you've got huge numbers, and all of Extinction Rebellion, with one honourable exception, and I'm going to discuss her in a moment because she's now left the organisation as a result of this, they all pretend that you can do it without nuclear. Now, nuclear isn't a panacea, as Professor Davies points out in his piece. It's not going to fix the problem of, say, long-haul transport or global shipping. You know, if you take fossil fuels out of global shipping, you finish up going back to windjammers and sail, as Professor Davies points out. But nuclear is a good start. You know, nuclear keeps the lights on. It deals with the problem of intermittency, and because it's a very very dense form of energy, it also deals with the problem of diffusion with renewables. To give you another statistic from Professor Davies's piece, if you wanted to power a city like Los Angeles or Brisbane or Tel Aviv, now I've deliberately picked 3 cities in very sunny parts of the world with very good climates for solar energy. You can do it, it is possible, but you would need to have an area as big as the physical cities in question, Tel Aviv, Brisbane, or Los Angeles, covered in solar panels.
Yes.
Now think about what that means.
Well, some places in the world are trying to do that, aren't they? They're trying to cover parts of Africa with solar panels. They're certainly They're certainly doing parts of the Nevada desert, I think, with solar panels as well.
Now you can do it. You can get away with it in some places, but in other aspects, it's extraordinarily destructive of the environment. And you also need fossil fuels as well as rare earth metals from only 2 countries in the world, well, 3, Congo, if you include the cobalt, which is where you get all the child slaves.
Yeah.
But the bulk of the rare earth metals that you need to make these things and to make your smartphones and so on and so forth come from China and Australia.
Yeah.
Think about what that means. I mean, I'm sure Australia would be happy to sell all of this stuff.
Yeah, but it's all got to be shipped, isn't it? It's all got to be shipped. Well, that's the thing.
You know, so people are simply not, Extinction Rebellion simply are not thinking through the logical consequences of what they're arguing, particularly when they're making this demented anti-capitalist, pro-socialist argument, when socialism notoriously has been destructive of the environment in quite extraordinary ways everywhere it has been tried, even in places that are moderately successful or have been moderately successful for periods of their history with a form of socialism. It's still incredibly destructive of the environment.
Well, of course, it's destructive of the economy as well. But what is the reason why so many governments in this world today, Helen, are buying into this zero carbon thing? Because it's a European objective from the EU. It's an objective from the UK. It's an objective from the USA. We're going to be having a G7 meeting in Torquay where everybody's going to fly in from all over the world, of course, on big jets to talk about reducing our carbon footprint. And it's like a form, for me, it's like a form of madness.
Well, a lot of politicians, and this is the point where I will praise one former member of Extinction Rebellion. Her name is Zion Lights. Okay. And she's on social... Yeah, it's a good name, isn't it? And she's on social media as @ZionTree. Okay. Collapsed together as one word. Now, she's pro-nuclear. And unlike a lot of these environmental activists, she's also numerate, and she's also got reasonably decent scientific training. And she's been the one who's been very, very good at throwing up in politicians' faces all of the implications of these airy promises that none of these politicians are going to have to deliver. And we all know in Britain, for example, a current parliament can't bind a future parliament, so they can make all their net zero promises until they're blue in the face, and then we'll come to the point where if we haven't gone nuclear, it will not be possible.
Yeah, but there is no political party in this country that I know of who are anti-zero carbon, as far as I can tell.
Yes, I know, and this is a classic case of politicians saying something because it sounds good.
Right.
And this is
well, they must. But I mean, we know politicians well enough, Helen. They must believe there's votes in it. I mean, for Boris Johnson to make out that there's going to be some green industrial revolution, for me, surely he can't be saying that unless he really believes that they can get money for it, that they can get backing for it. That I mean, when you see Jaguar and Land Rover, for example, telling everyone that they're going to stop making diesel and petrol cars sometime within the next 5 to 10 years, you start to wonder what's going on.
Well, this is, I suspect, one of the reasons why Boris Johnson is doing this is he is aware, as any educated conservative is. You can read Roger Scruton's books on green politics, for example, where he tries to give a conservative perspective on this. But Johnson will be aware, as will other people in the Tory party, that traditionally this issue was owned by the right, and he wants it back, and he wants the votes that go with it. But the problem is the rhetoric since the 1960s has been so colonized by the left, it's very, very hard for him to claim that issue back for the conservative side of politics. He's trying to. Whether it will succeed is difficult to say, once again, because we've got the constitutional issue of a current parliament not being able to bind a future parliament. So Boris Johnson can basically sprat off all he likes and pass all the bills he likes, and a future government of whatever stripe he finds that it can't do this will just simply repeal them because
Well, the worry I've got, though, Helen, and I'm sorry we're out of time already, the worry I've got is that the work will have been done, the damage will have been done, the infrastructure will have been built, and it'll be too late to undo it all because it'll all have cost so much money. And that, I think, seems to me
that is a real risk.
To be the
and
problem.
That is the argument, and that's why I recommend people read Professor Davies's piece, to just be aware of the issues with this and to not be sold a nice sounding pup that grows up into a nasty bitey thing that goes after little children,
exactly
basically.
Right. Exactly right. Helen, thank you very much indeed. Helen Dale on the true conservatism and the true kind of conservationism, if you like, that goes hand in hand with conservatism as it used to do. That would be good. Not what we are getting now, which is this kind of zero carbon craziness.